manager. You have your client, not config manager client. You have your client, either client computers or server hardware, whatever type of clients they are, and connected to switches. And at some point, the switches are connected to your config manager server. So we mentioned that for us to be able to manage this client, we first of all need to install some form of agent on them, which is the config manager agent. And we mentioned that there are different methods that we can use to install these agents on this client. So for us to be able to manage this, so actually config manager is not just communicating, it's not just communicating randomly to this computer, it's communicating with this agent on this computer. So that's what it's communicating with. So within this agent, no problems, no problems, Chris. So within this agent are multiple components that does multiple things. Um, so that's what config manager is communicating with. It's communicating with the agents that you've installed on this computer. So what does that mean? That has a lot of implication. What that means is if something were to happen with this agent, config manager actually loses, excuse me, its ability to communicate with this agent. So this agent, the health of this agent is really important. More recently, I was in a meeting where um, with our internal IT, and one of the things that we were discussing was how do we improve our Windows update infrastructure and that. And one of the suggestions that came up was about using going the route of config manager, integrating WSOS with config manager, to get more, flexibility in terms of our Windows update rollout, and just to get more reporting options and just a lot of administration ease also in terms of testing whatever we're doing with config manager, because with config manager we can do user-based deployment, we can create collections on the fly, whereas you can't create groups of computers on the fly in WSOS. You have to modify group policy, wait for group policy to take effect, wait for the machines to communicate with the WSOS server and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that shut down that argument was, hey, can we guarantee that this agent are 100% healthy all the time so that we know that every machine on the network will be getting Windows update all the time? Well, well, if you look on the dashboard of most environments and you open the dashboard and you look config manager, you notice that for many clients, the agents are not healthy. So that's not good, because if this agent is not healthy in any way, they lose the ability to be managed. So it's really, really important that these agents are healthy within config manager. So one thing we talked about is when you want to install this client, and typically you use a file called Ccmsetup. So let me make this bigger. Use a file called Ccmsetup.exe. And Ccmsetup.exe, can someone remember what we said it does? What does Ccmsetup.exe, what does it do? So you want to install this config manager agent on this client, you just run ccmsetup.exe. But what does ccmsetup.exe do? Anyone? Chris? If you remember what we said something important last week.
Yeah, I know it's on the tip of my tongue. I know that the CC setup, I believe, was for installing the agent, but something else. Discovery.
Yeah, well, no, not discovery. Okay, let's see. Talk about Taiwo. What do you think? What does ccmsetup.exe? What does it do?
Well, it configures the agent on the client.
In what way? In what way does it configure the agent?
Um, oh, okay, I think I know what you're trying to,
Yeah.
it tries to find, it will find the SCCM server and kind of like, it configures the agent on the client, but also it communicates with the SCCM server. I mean, because I think if you're going to run it manually,
Mhm.
you need to put the SCCM server, the location, information during setup.
So let's bring this one up. Um, so we have so this is another new SCCM server that I just installed yesterday because the old one I tried as much as possible to recover it, but every time I try to recover it, it keeps telling me evaluation expired. So eventually I just gave up and installed the new one. Um, so on the on the C, if I go on the program files, on the Microsoft Configuration Manager, on the client here, and here we are. Here are the files that if I want to install Configuration Manager on a client machine, I have a I have a client machine here. I have client one, I have client two. Client one is Windows 8.1, client two is Windows 10. Um, I can actually just go on my SCCM server and copy this client folder, yep, and transfer it to my client machine, which is maybe LB client one, yep, and transfer it here. And then when I transfer it here, I just go and run Ccmsetup.exe, and then it starts the whole process of the installation. But in essence, what exactly is going on when I run ccmsetup.exe? Here's what is going on. Ccmsetup.exe, if you look at it, it's only 1.7 meg. Yeah, that's just 1.7 meg file. So it's not like a real heavy file in itself. Ccmsetup.exe is just a wrapper. Yeah, it's not the actual client. So ccmsetup.exe is not the actual client. It's just a wrapper. And here's what it's doing in the background. Ccmsetup.exe will start the installation process. So if I run it on the client, it kicks off that installation process. Yeah. Then the next thing it's going to do is going to say, okay, somebody has executed me on this client. What's the location that I'm going to download the source files from? So, in other words, the next thing it does is I start the installation process. Next thing it does is it determines where to download the source files from. So in this case, let's make this clearer. What do we mean by the source files? Which source files is it looking for? Here's what it's looking for. Because again, like we said, ccmsetup.exe is not actually the client itself, it's just a wrapper. So the source files it's looking for is source files like the prerequisites. So again, back to our SCCM server. And if I go under that client folder again, so under this client folder, if I open this, for example, x64. Now look at all these files. I'm seeing Windows Update Agent, Windows Firewall Configuration Provider, Visual C++ Redistributable, Visual C++ Redistributable, another distro, Microsoft Policy Platform Setup. What are all these files that are located in this folder inside this client folder? Those are the prerequisites. Because for you to install the SCCM client, for it to be successful, it needs certain prerequisites. If those prerequisites are not installed on your machine, they will be installed during the process. And the way they will be installed is because what you've run is you've run ccmsetup.exe. Because ccmsetup.exe will go and start the installation process. Okay, where do I get the source files from? After determining where I get the source files from, then it goes to which of these prerequisites do you have installed? Which one do you not have installed? Oh, do you not have Visual C++ 5 installed? I'm going to install it. If you have it installed, that's fine. Do you not have Windows Update Angel Agent installed to the latest version? I will install it. If you have it installed already, fine. So it goes through, it determines where to download the source files from. And what the source files contain, source files contains prerequisites and the client agent. So the source file, what that means is that this is not actually the client agent. The client agent is something else. But this one contains, it's a wrapper that controls the whole process. It's kind of like the puppet master, which says, okay, first thing I want you to do is start this process. Okay, check where to download the files from. Okay, after doing that, then the next thing it does after doing that is it detects and installs missing prerequisites. So that's the next thing it does. So it looks for the prerequisite and see, is anyone missing? If any prerequisite is missing, I'm going to kick it off and start installing it. So after installing all the prerequisites, it now go ahead and calls client.msi. Client.msi is the actual configuration manager client agent. But if you go ahead and run client.msi, you notice that it's just going to try to install the client. It has no ability to detect if a prerequisite is missing. It has no ability to download them from any location. All it just knows is I'm going to install myself as an agent on this computer. Which is why if you're pushing config manager client out, you're not going to push it out using client.msi. You have to use this Ccmsetup.exe, because it's only that way that you're going to be able to detect missing prerequisites, download missing prerequisites, install the missing prerequisites. Then at the end of it, it's going to call this client.msi, which is actually install the configuration manager agent on the computer. Any question regarding that? So that was one of the things that we're discussing last week, that always remember that. So back to this one again. Yeah, back to yeah, carry on.
So the wrapper,
Yep.
basically, as you said, it's. I'm trying to use my own analogy for understanding. It seems that it's the package that's wrapped. You drop it,
Yep.
and the location is desired. It assesses the situation,
Yep.
sees whether it needs updates. If it does, it installs the updates.
Yep.
Once everything hits and is equal to all prerequisites, then
It
the
calls
installation moves forward. It calls
Yep.
forward for the
Yep.
client. Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh,
Perfect.
actually, Abdul actually I'll answer the question, but I didn't see his answer. Abdul already answered it. Abdul says it will call ccmsetup.msi. So Abdul, so this here's one of the things that this one is not really that much important, But in terms of if you're doing the exam, who knows? This may come out, but Abdul said it will call ccmsetup.msi. So Abdul, you're close. But what it will actually call is not ccmsetup. Yeah, it is. What it will actually call is not ccmsetup.msi. It calls client.msi. So ccmsetup.msi is something different. Does anyone want to tell what ccmsetup.msi, what it does? Anyone wants to attempt it? Abdul, ccmsetup.msi is something different from client.msi. So actually, if I go back again on my config manager server, and if I go on the bin, I think under here, if I keep to, yeah, here we go.
Installs the entire MSI package, perhaps.
Install what? Installs what?
The MSI package, all of the contents containing in the MSI package.
Yeah, but in what case?
Partially.
Because okay, look at this. This is inside config manager bin i386. I can see ccmsetup.msi here, which is not ccmsetup.exe. It's different. But then if I go back here on the client here, I see ccmsetup.exe. So what ccmsetup.msi does? Yeah, excellent, Abdul. So CCM, for example, we mentioned also that there are different ways to install the client. You can use client push, um, you can use manual installation. In all those cases, you're using ccmsetup.exe, which will do the rest of the process for you. But in the case where you want to deploy the config manager agent using a group policy object, yeah. In that case, what you need is, if you want to deploy any software with group policy object, you can only use .msl files, right? You can't use .exe. You can't deploy .exe with group policy object. So in that case, how do you deploy this intelligent wrapper, like what Chris said? How do you deploy this intelligent wrapper when it's an exe? So does that mean I have to use client.msi, which is not intelligent, which basically, a there's prerequisite missing, it will just fail. That's it. I can't rectify the situation. Prerequisite missing, it's failed. So what Microsoft has now done is they provided another file which does this a similar thing to what Ccmsetup.exe does, but it does it, but it's an MSI file now. It's not an exe file. So if you want to deploy using a group policy object, that's when you use ccmsetup.msi. In which case you you use that when you're using group policy deployment, and it just basically does the same thing. Starts the installation processes, determines where do I download the source files from. So this is one other interesting one to note. Whenever config manager is like, where do I download the source files from? It has different places that it's going to check. Does anyone know where it's going to check? The primary place it's going to check is going to be checking where does anyone say anything? Any idea of where it's going to check?
Management points.
Excellent. Sorry, but here's the thing, Taiwo.
Fine.
So, that's absolutely right. So, but here's another question, because this one, all these ones is not that it's not that they're like really like super important, but it's something that will help us to understand config management more. So Taiwo mentioned that it's going to get the source files. When is determining where do I download it from? It's probably going to download it from the management point. Okay, here's the thing. Here's a very good one. Um, um, Abdul says Ccmsetup.msi will install the will install the um, prerequisite. What do you think, Abdul? Do you think it's not going to install the prerequisites? Okay. Let's see. Let's bring that up. 1 minute. Ccmsetup.msi. Um, um, Ccmsetup.msi. So let's see. Um, because here's the question I have, Abdul. Is that if ccmsetup.msi, if it doesn't install the prerequisites, so why not use client.msi then? Because client.msi is the agent. Why have to go use ccmsetup.msi if it doesn't do anything that client.msi does not do? Why do we need to basically go down the route of we're going to be using this ccmsetup.msi, if it's going to just trying to bring up 1 minute, trying to bring up my notes. ccm so ccm setup.msi. Let's see. So you may be right, absolutely right. Mm, okay, so look at this. So you can see the file, you can see the screen. Uh, yeah, okay. So if I go up to see ccmsetup.exe, okay, you can see ccmsetup.exe. It says um, it starts the installation process. It determines the source file location, typically management point, detects and install missing prerequisites. It calls the client.msi installer file, and then client.msi does all the rest. Then looking down, it describes what ccmsetup.exe does again. It determines the location to download from. If you start it without command line option, again, this is something that we'll just quickly revise. And then client.msi, after ccmsetup installs the required prerequisite on the internal client, ccmsetup invokes client.msi by using msi exec. this Windows installer file installs the client on the system. So this is actually like the client one on itself. So ccmsetup.msi says you can use GPUs to deploy the configuration manager client agent. GPUs use the ccmsetup.msi file to initiate the installation process. This file is located in this one. So they didn't actually like go into too much details as to what it does. But my question, so what I was aware of, I'm not sure whether I heard this from anywhere, but what I was aware of is that ccmsetup.msi basically does a similar thing to what ccmsetup.exe does, but you use this whenever you're deploying using group policy object. Because again, my question would be, why do I need a special file, a special MSI file, which doesn't do anything special than what client.msi does? Because all I need to do is just deploy client.msi using a GPU, and it's just going to install the client, right? So why do I need to trouble myself using ccmsetup.msi when it does the same thing that client.msi does? So I think it's something that we may need to research some more, but I think it does the same thing that let me search, see if I can see any answers on Google. But I think it does the same thing that ccmsetup.exe does. Anybody found anything? Let's just do ccmsetup.msi. Nothing here. Um, okay, I'm seeing some people mentioning some stuff here. Okay, let's see this one. Okay, but this is a really old one. But maybe it's still useful. Let's see. Um, um, mm, let's see. Um, mm, yeah, I can't really see. Does anyone see anything that really describe in details what ccmsetup.msi does? Um,
Now I'm just
I've
finding the.
not actually gone deep into this.
what?
I just No, I said I've not actually gone deep into CCM setup. I
Yeah.
just know if I deploy it will.
With that one, yeah. I tell you, very, very soon, like just till today, I got someone called me and said, I'm deploying. So I think a user went on their machine and was like, yeah, maybe the user is feeling really intelligent. I'm gonna free my machine of things that are using memories and CPUs or whatever, and just start uninstalling stuff. And decided, yeah, this config manager agent stuff, just get rid of it. And then uninstalled it from their machine. Now people are like, yeah, we're trying to reinstall it back on the machine, but it's not installing back. It kept failing every single time. To just go ahead and do client push, do manually. It just goes ccmsetup.exe in task manager, and it just stays there for hours. It does nothing after that. And then you have to troubleshoot that. So basically, it's good to have like some understanding of what is actually going on.
Very
At that point, it's like, okay, what? Why is it failing? Is it downloading anything? Uh, yeah, I'm not really seeing anything in terms of this one. Um, Abdul, I'm not sure. I can't really see. I'm trying to look it up. I'm trying to find anything. I'm not sure where using CCM setup and yeah, this just so most of the information I'm seeing here regarding, but I'm not sure if I don't want to blame my instructor. But
But I will have put the CCM setup.exe and CCM setup.msi
mm,
are the same. One is just one that you can deploy through group policy.
yeah, yeah, that's my thinking also. And yeah, and somebody may say,
In,
so why not just use ccmsetup.msi in Why not just use ccmsetup.msi, for your normal deployment then? Why need another ccmsetup.exe? You know, well, one of the reasons is because if you're using ccmsetup.msi, you have to install, like what we read earlier in the note. Remember, it says it calls, it said it's ccmsetup.exe calls client.msi, right? But it invokes it using msi exec, which is what runs msi files. Well, the thing is, msi exec, you have limited number of switches that you can use with it. If I want to install ccmsetup.exe, there's a lot of switches I can use. I can go ccmsetup.exe and, like the one that we're talking about, I can go ccmsetup.exe and I can go SMS site code uh, equals, you know, equals UK1. I can go SMS cache site. So I can use all these different switches, all these different custom switches with ccmsetup.exe because it's a custom app. But if I use .msi, I can't use all the switches now with this, you know. But the thing is, that's one of the limitations. If you're deploying something to GPU, it has to be .msi. So it's kind of like a best effort that, see, you're going to miss out on some of the switches, but then you can still configure some of those switches through group policy templates. So actually, look, when I was searching some stuff on this, I found this one. So this one is like a really good one on. So um, yeah, I'm not sure. I can't. Let me see if I can open it in a different bar. If it's gonna open and it's gonna be, yeah, that's just a very small image. Okay, so this one is just basically a user's added config manager ccmsetup.msi here, and then you basically, if I go back under this config manager, right, and I go back under bin, and I go back on the I'm not sure if it's on the x64. So there's a place that has under tools, maybe under tools. Yeah, there we go. Configuration manager ADMT template. So I can import this administrative template into group policy. So once I import this administrative template, I can now set, the same settings that I can use to ccmsetup.exe. I can go ccmsetup.exe, forward slash SMS site code equals to this one. I can now put all those ones inside a template, a group policy object template. Then ccmsetup.msi will now read those settings from this template. So, which is like you see the difference is why Microsoft has gone to the essence of creating something a different .msi, and one of the reasons why, because why can't you just use ccmsetup.msi if it does the same thing that ccmsetup.exe does? Because you can use custom switches. Because for you to be able to use switches, same switches that you use, you have to go through the effort of importing group policy templates and then configuring all these group policy options to get the same settings that you can just specify on the command line for ccmsetup.exe. So that's the reason for like all those differences. So back to I'm not sure if that is helpful at all. Sorry, I didn't find a very clear answer for you, but my thought is still ccmsetup.msi does what same thing that ccmsetup.exe does. We can still look that up, and in case you find any information that differs, please post in the page on the page somewhere. Okay, so moving forward, so we now talk about like, so that's the whole process that goes on. So it does all this, downloads, the prerequisite from the management point. So the question I was going to ask is this: that was as it downloads the source files from the management point. Now, here's one thing about config manager. Here's an important thing to note. Every communication, well, not every, but let's just call it every for now. We can change it later. Every communication between your configuration manager client and the configuration manager server is to a management point. Yeah. So it's not configuration manager client installed on this machine talking to a configuration manager site server. No, it's talking to a configuration manager management point. But before you can talk to a configuration manager management point, you need the client installed on you first. Now, here's what we're saying. We're saying that we have a machine that doesn't have a client installed yet. So this client is not installed on this machine yet. We're about to install this client. Yet this client recognizes this management point to be able to say, hey, management point, I need to download some files from you. How is it that this client knows the location of this management point? Where does it get that information from? I'm not sure if that is clear at all.
I get, but I think if you are deploying from from SCCM, if you're not deploying it manually, because
Yeah,
I think if you're deploying manually, you need to specify the management point.
yeah.
But if you are deploying from SCCM, maybe uh, client push,
Hmm.
I think that it deploys it with the information about the management point.
So,
So the client automatically knows the management point because SCCM is deploying it. So it sends the information along with the installation.
yeah, nice one. So, yeah, I think, well, yeah. So, Taiwo said something. So, Abdul also said something. Abdul said from AD, I think. So, actually, you're both correct. Because it goes through a step of process to determine where do I download it from, which management point do I download it from, because it doesn't have the client. So how does it find out where is the management point? So it actually follows a process. Number one process that it follows is this. It's like, is it specified in installation switch? So what does that mean? I can go, like I said, on the machine, and I can go ccm. Again, I think I just need to remove this this one. Ccmsetup.exe. I can go /mp management point. um I can see my management point is lb sccm1 dot com. Again, just not to, so as not to give wrong information, let's just look up quickly what the right management switches are. So configuration manager client switches. So okay. So let's look up properly. So it's /mp. So just go mp. Um well /mp. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so that's right. So let me expand this one, make it much bigger. Is this much better now? Can you see this one much more clearly? Ccmsetup.exe/mp, and I've specified one. So now you're basically saying, hey, here's a management point, right? So it can read the information from here to know where to download it from. So what if I've not specified this information? So actually, when Taiwo said we're using client push, so actually client push is also manual. Because for client push, remember, you have to specify the switches that you'll be using, remember, under,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
So you have to specify. So it's also manual. So when we're doing client push, it's only manual. It's also manual. Only that this case is the configuration. So I have to specify it here. If I don't specify it here, it's not going to work. So I have to specify and say, hey, management point equals to this one or whatever. So I specify the client switches here. So that's the first thing it uses.
Specify here or it's populated automatically.
You mean like if I go, okay, like this one. Okay, let's go close this one.
Because I think that's a site code, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, but I think that's always I don't know, I might be wrong, but I've not checked. But I think is that not meant to is that not there automatically or is it
you mean the site code.
yeah the information in here?
So the information here, the only one that will be here by default. So I think as at this point, if I go on the servers and site systems, I have a management point already. So I have this management point, but the information is not here. So the only information that is here by default is information about the site. And that's because I have a single site.
Hmm.
So I have to specify the properties there.
All right.
Yeah.
I used to think it was I mean once you install everything gets configured there.
So you have to either. So if you so here's the reason why. Here's the reason why it may look that way, Taiwo, is that because most people follow like all the practices of extending AD schema, right? You don't have
Yeah.
to extend AD schema for config manager to work.
Yes, I
Yeah.
know it.
So you don't have to extend AD schema, but then the thing is, once you extended the schema, configuration manager publishes information to Active Directory.
So I if my schema is not extended, then I need to do this manually. Then
Exactly, which
oh,
will work. So, which
right.
is why I said your answer is right and Abdul's answer is right because it goes through a series. It's like, is it specified manually on the setup switch? Yes, I'm going to use that. If it's not specified manually, then it checks Active Directory and says, hey, is this information published in Active Directory somewhere? It's like, oh, no, it's not published in Active Directory. Then it goes number three. Is it specified in DNS? Because you can publish information about your management point in DNS, service record. Is it specified in DNS? No. Then it goes number four. Is it specified in Wins if you're still using NetBIOS and Wins? Is it specified in Win if you still have a Win server on your network? Is it specified in Wins on a Win server somewhere? So it goes through that process. It checks if there's an installation switch that you have, if you specified in on the installation switch. If not, it checks in Active Directory. If not, it checks in DNS. If not, it checks in Wins. And this understanding this will really help you when you're troubleshooting management point information later on. Like more recently, I didn't set up a site configuration manager, but more recently I was just looking through it, taking all these things I've learned in the courses and just going back to environment and seeing what's going on, reading the book about what they mentioned, then going back to the site to see what's been configured. Like, hold on, when I was checking, hold on, management point usage report, uh, everything is pointing to one management point. Okay, hold on, we have three management points located around the world. One in Asia region, one in the EU region, one in North America. But hold on, everyone is pointing to the one in UK. What's going on here? And then we were having a SCCM steering meeting. I was like, yeah, one thing I noticed, guys, everyone in this environment is using the UK management point. And they were like, no. I was like, yeah. And then we went and saw it, and like everyone is using the UK management point. And then if you don't understand this information, then all of a sudden you're like, it's like confusing, like what actually going on, which one is going on. Because okay, if I have multiple management points and it checks in Active Directory and it finds multiple management points there, how does it select which one to use? People think if I'm in UK and I have a management point, just right next to me, it's going to select the one in UK. No, it could just be a point of which management point responds to me first. And once I pick that, that's it. That's the one I'm going to use. So they were configured. Maybe they're like any management point in Active Directory. Yeah, there's one in UK, one in Asia, one in this one. Management point respond. UK management point respond. They picked UK management point and they are tied to the UK management point and they keep using that.
But what if,
Mhm.
like you said, there are three management points.
Yeah,
If I deploy, let's say, from Asia's management point,
yeah.
automatically those clients will get Asia's site code on their system. So does that work? I mean, what I'm trying to say is
Yeah.
because you said all the clients they are
Hmm.
using the UK's management point.
Yes.
What if, let's say, now use Asia's management point to
Hmm.
deploy the client? Then automatically they now get Asia's management point. Am I correct?
Not really. In terms of age, in terms of cost, if we go back a bit, whenever we're doing client push installation, what is doing the push? Is it management point?
Because
What site system role is doing the push? It's a site server, right?
is it the site server that
Yep.
is doing
It's the site server that's doing the push.
Okay.
because that settings is configured under which console? Under the site console.
The reason I ask is I have done one funny stuff before.
Yeah.
I installed two SCCM servers on the
Hmm.
same domain.
Yeah.
But if I deploy a client to if I deploy the agent to all the clients, they
Yeah.
all have the management points, the site code of
Hmm.
the ones that I deploy. But then if I now go back
Hmm.
and use the second SCCM server to deploy to those clients,
Hmm.
they now get the new one. So
Hmm.
maybe the site code for the first one is UK1. All
Hmm.
my get UK1. But
Yeah.
then if I now say, okay, right, I want half of this. If I select certain clients and say, well, I
Hmm.
want you to have UK2,
Hmm.
they all automatically have it. So what I'm saying is, what my question is, now they have it.
Hmm.
Is there maybe overnight? Because I think there's always a maintenance on all these agents. I think they reinstall automatically at night or they check. I can't remember. So
Hmm.
does that reset everything I've done?
So here's the thing. That's a really, really nice question, Taiwo. And here's one thing that will help to make it even much more clearer. Let's bring it up. So because here's one thing I've noticed with config manager also is that, and it happens a lot with me also, like, because I get confused like with a lot of the terms because they're really identical. You're talking about assignment, you're talking about management point, and they all sound like really, really identical. Like, yeah, assignment, management point, or people mention things like fallback status point, right?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you mention fallback site, and you hear fallback, and you're like, yeah, it's fallback site, fallback, but fallback site is different from fallback status point. Fallback side is different from fallback status point, and they're doing completely different things. But because of the whole process looks so familiar. So here's the thing: in your config manager, you have client, right? We have
Yeah.
client here. Yeah. Right at the very beginning, I think the very first hangout we did, we mentioned that the basic unit in a config manager is something called a site. Yeah. And we mentioned that a site, um, there are three types of sites and they have different purposes. So they are not interchangeable. We mentioned that a site is the basic component of a config manager. So we say this is a site. There are three types of sites and they do different things. So we have a primary site, we have a secondary site, and we have a central admin site. Now, a primary site, the purpose is for, um, let's say, policy assignment. And the reason why we're taking this one, you see the reason very soon. So when we say this config manager, there are different things that happen with this config manager client once you have the client installed. First of all, this client, so these are different processes. Number one, this client must be assigned to a site. So that's one thing that must happen. So when we say this client must be assigned to a site, let's break it down also. What does it mean by this client must be assigned to a site? What that means is this is where the client will get its policy from. That's the simple meaning.
I'm Brenda.
Hello, Brenda.
I'm the wife.
Sorry. Yeah. So when you say um config man when you say a client is assigned to a site, what does that mean? It means this is where you get your policy from. And if you remember at the beginning, we mentioned that out of all these three sites, there's only one site that you can assign config manager client to, a primary site. You cannot assign a config manager to a second client to a secondary site. You cannot assign a config manager to a central admin site. And the very first hangout, we went a lot into details about the reason why we can't. And actually, if we bring up the my the note again, where's the note? Okay, if we bring up the note again, that was let's go main chapters and sub chapters, config manager. So where we talked about site assignment. So it mentioned you can only assign config manager to a primary site, not to a secondary site. So where was talking about the different sites.
David, the site that you're talking about, is this pertaining to the current OSI model that's actually on site, or is this a site like you had mentioned earlier when doing the configuration? Some people may choose UK, you may choose UK or US or whatever site comes first, etc. Is this site factor like kind of like pertaining to like Active Directory site, or is this site as in like radius, if you will?
Yeah, so that is one of the things also again that makes config manager because there's a lot of cross-functional terms. Like we hear about also, like you mentioned also, we have site and you're thinking, okay, hold on, I'm a system admin also. So I know about Active Directory site. So then someone is talking about site again. So the concept of site here is different from the concept of site in Active Directory. If I take a brand new server, um, like I did yesterday, take a brand new server and I say I want to install config manager on this server. So, install SQL on it, do install all the prerequisites, install Windows ADK. Now config manager time to be installed. Double click on the installation, comes up. One of the first things ask you is tell me which type of site you want to install. And I have two options at that point. So I can either install a primary site or a central admin site. And if I go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to install a primary site, it goes ahead and installs it and configures it. If I say I want to install a central admin site, it goes ahead and installs it. But the whole concept of a site in config manager is a bit different. And then one of the other things is that, because you have primary site, secondary site, central admin site, it looks as if they're like the same thing. They're like doing the same thing, right? It's like, yeah, maybe central admin side is just a much more bigger primary site. Secondary side is kind of like a mini primary site. No, it's not a mini primary site. It does something completely different than the primary site. What the secondary site does, primary site don't do it. What the primary site does, so it makes it confusing when you say we have three types of site. Primary site, secondary site is like, yeah, we have like a secondary site is like a mini primary site. It's not a mini primary site. It's completely different, and it will become clearer. Like, let's see, okay, let's see. It says a primary site in System Center 2002 is a site with the primary purpose of supporting clients in a well-connected network. To manage devices with config manager, you need at least one primary site. Then it goes ahead and mention you can tier primary site from older config manager, but you can't do that in SCCM 2012. Um, then it goes ahead, primary sites, okay, then it mentions secondary sites, and then let's scroll down. Um, where it mentions uh, site assignment. So there's one thing that, because I know we pointed this one out exactly a lot in the very first Hangout, we really emphasized this and pointed this out, and I think it's written somewhere here, somewhere. We're gonna see it somewhere. It's written here somewhere.
I think
Um,
once I understand the principle of the primary site and centralized site, I think
yeah,
that's when I'm going to understand exactly what its purpose is and its role is.
yeah,
Then,
exactly.
then it'll all fall together for me.
Yeah, but look at this information. Look at this. It says
Okay.
in config manager, the site have the following roles. You have central admin site. Look at this one. The only purpose is for generating reports and administration. That's all. Primary site. Use primary site to manage client systems. All client systems are assigned to a primary site. That's important. So actually, let's go. No, I don't want to print it. I just I want to search Google for that phrase. All clients are assigned to a primary site. That's a really important one to note. every single client is assigned to a primary site, and there's actually there's you cannot assign clients secondary site. So you cannot. So that's one other thing. I'm not sure if this one will actually come with something, but I think there was actually one documentation from Microsoft that makes it like really, really clear, that emphasizes it. I think we mentioned that also in the first one, that says, "Hey, secondary side, you cannot assign client to a secondary site." Um, oh, where does this? Um, okay, this one is talking about how it locates management point. Um, mm, okay, yeah, look at this. I think this one. Client cannot be assigned to it. Yeah, very nice one. Uh, clients. Aha, okay. Um, Taiwo, you can see this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says, look at this information. It says after a System Center 2012 Configuration Manager client is installed, it must join a System Center 2012 Configuration Manager primary site before it can be managed. That's important. So this is not talking about management point at this point. This is talking about you must be assigned to a site before you can be managed. Which type of site must it be assigned to? A primary site, right?
Yeah.
The site that a
Yep.
client joins is referred to as its assigned site. Client cannot be assigned to a central admin site or to a secondary site. So that's really important. It's really important to note that, because the first thing that happens is the client is assigned to a site. Then after the client is assigned to a site, the next thing, again, which site will the client be assigned to?
The
Primaries,
primary.
secondary, or cars? Primary. Okay,
Primary.
let's do this one this way, Taiwo. This one will help us to understand it more. So let's delete this one. So let's say we have a primary site here, Taiwo. Yeah. So these are primary site one. Yeah. Let's say
Yeah.
below here we have a secondary site and we have another secondary site here. Inside this secondary site we have clients. So we have many clients inside this secondary site. Yeah. So these are secondary site one. These are secondary site two. Of course, secondary sites can only be children of primary site, right? They can't be standalone. So they have to be children of primary site. Let's say they are children of this primary site. This
So they have
this client in this site, where are they assigned to?
the primary site.
Can they be assigned? So there's a secondary site server here. So there's site server. So there's a secondary site server here that's acting as a site server for this site. There's a secondary site server here that's acting as site server for this site. There's a primary site server here that's acting as the site server for the primary site. But which one of these sites are these clients in this secondary site assigned to? They are all assigned, every single one of them are assigned to this primary site. Because again, look at that information again. So that's really, really important to note. Looking at that information again, clients cannot be assigned to a central admin site or to a secondary site. The client must join a primary site before it can be managed. So that's the first thing that happens. Now, this process is different from the second process. So after this client has like, oh, I'm joined to this primary site, they've located their primary site, right? Then the next thing is, let's locate a management point that I can communicate with. Aha! So here's the next one, Taiwo, that we're talking about, management point. Now, it's true. Why is true that you can have a management point here on this site server? It's also a secondary site server, but you can have a management point here. And it's true that you can have a management point on this secondary site, and you can also have a management point on this primary site. The truth is, because all these clients are assigned to which side again?
Primary site.
Which management points do they have to choose from?
From the primary site.
They can choose any one of these ones. They can choose this one, they can choose this one, they can choose this one. They can choose any one of these.
All right. Okay.
So the process that they will use to choose, you can specify manually and say to the client, this is your management point. And the client takes that instruction, this is my management point. Okay. And it starts communicating with that. Or the client can go to Active Directory and say, give me a list of management points available. So not until, so this is another good one, Tayo. So how do we solve the situation that I mentioned at work, where servers are, not servers, clients are, in Boston, USA, with a management point right in the data center below them, but they are communicating with a management point all the way in Abingdon, United Kingdom, or in Oxford, United Kingdom. How do I solve that problem? If you look at this, configuration manager 2012 how to service pack 1 features. So there's a new feature. So what's new in configuration manager? So that's one thing. So actually, this is like one of the good reasons to be reading whenever Microsoft releases anything, you know, just pick it up and just read through the new feature. Something may be interesting to you. Because as I was reading this, all of a sudden I was like, hold on, this one looks interesting. this feature looks interesting. So let's go management point. Aha, look at this feature. You can configure preferred management point for each primary site. Preferred management point are specified like content servers associated to a boundary when you configure boundary groups. Client identify preferred management point from the assigned site, and then when communicating with their site, use the management point associated with their network location before using other management points from the site. So again, remember he's talking about because clients are always assigned to primary site. You can't assign them to secondary site. So what he's saying is that starting from this version of config manager, which is the latest version, now you can specify using boundary groups. You remember when you're talking about boundary groups, I remember. You
Yeah.
can use boundary groups before to specify distribution point, right? And
Yeah.
you can use boundary groups to specify state migration point. But now from this version, we can use boundary groups to specify management point. In which case, before, so I can say this boundary, let's say this boundary is 192.168.3.0/24. And this one is 192.168.4.0/24. So what I can say is, hey, anything in 192.168.4.0, this is your preferred management point. Before you go ahead looking at all the other management points in your primary site, this is the one you should consider first. If this one now fails, now you can consider all these other management points in your primary site. So let's go back to that information again, because this will help to make it clearer. So back to this information, it says, when I now configure a preferred management point, client identify preferred management point from the assigned site, and then when communicating with their site, they use the management point associated with their network location, which is what we did. Anything in this boundary group or network location, you use this management point before using other management points from the site. So again, they can use any management point from the site. But because now I have a method of configuring a preferred one, they will use that preferred one. So how do I solve the issue? I have to go in and using boundary group information, I have to start specifying this is for this boundary group, for this network location, this is your preferred management point. For this network location, this is your preferred management point. So that wasn't possible. Actually, it was possible in the version before R2 Service Pack 1, but you have to go into the registry. But now they've exposed it to the GUI, where you can actually configure it in the GUI and say, this network location, this boundary group, this is your preferred management point. So does that make it clearer, Taiwo?
Yeah. It does.
So again, so because I also understand how that could be confusing, because we are talking about sites and management point, there's a lot of location going on, what's going on. So there's site assignment. It's something completely different from management point location. So it's a different process. And then as we go, you start seeing things that will even be much more confusing. Things like fall back site. And then you start hearing again of fall back status point. And then you're like, hold on, I remember when the instructor was teaching this thing and we were like, oh, yeah, then the fallback, and I was like, hold on, but you said fallback could not do that in the last one. In the last slide, you said fallback could not do that, and you're talking about something completely different because fallback site is different from fallback status point. So again, the differences are these two that we just discussed. So fallback site has to do with site assignment. So if a config manager client cannot assign itself to a site, let's say you have multiple primary sites, you can configure a fallback site. So it says, hey, there's no way for me to automatically determine my site. So I will fall back to this site for site assignment. Fallback status point is, hey, I can't communicate with the management point. I need to report that to a server that will be aware. So I'll communicate with a fallback status point. So there are two different processes. So it's true that they're locating and locating something, but the locations or what they're doing is different. So site assignment is different from management point location. So any question regarding that? Because I think that's where we'll stop for today. So we weren't actually able to go into our topic for today, but I hope that this one has been really helpful. At least, if anything, now let's be clear in our minds that site assignment is different from management point location. Site assignment, again, to make it clearer, what does it mean by site assignment? It simply means this is where I get my policies from. And if you go look at the first video again in this Hangout series, one of the first things we talked about is this site server on this secondary site. It has a database in it, but the database doesn't contain any client information. Abdul, if you remember, Abdul, remember this. So the database on this site server has no client information on it. And we explained what database here contains. So which is the reason why clients can be assigned to that because there's no client information there. But database here contains client information. So clients can be assigned to the secondary site. They can be assigned to the primary site. And then when we now talked about about site assignment and the way clients are assigned to the primary site, and then after that, they now have to communicate with the management point. So when they want to select the management point they communicate with, the process that we mentioned is what they follow. First thing they look is it specified manually? If not, in Active Directory, send me a list of management points that are available. And the same thing with distribution point. And it could be a matter of which one of them responds to me quicker, which one of them responds to me first. And I pick that and I keep using that until it fails. So if it doesn't fail, I'm tied to using that management point. And that's where I report all my messages and all of that too. So because you have clients here, know in your mind that if it's a secondary site, they are not assigned to that secondary site. They are assigned to the primary site above. So all the secondary sites doing, which we explained in the very first Hangout, is that this is just a proxy. This is just a way for you to control downflow of bandwidth and upflow of bandwidth. So otherwise, there's no way for you to control the bandwidth usage between these two. So, but once you have a secondary site, now you can use throttling. You can go and set a rate limit and say, hey, you can only use this bandwidth between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock. You can only use this 20% of the bandwidth. But if you don't have that, there's no way for you to limit the traffic. So you can limit traffic, downflow of traffic if you put a distribution point. So we explained all that like in the very first Hangout, but it's a good revision to note. So site assignment just means I'm getting my policy from the site. So because another thing that will help you to understand this is that this site has a database, right? Taiwo, this site has a database.
Yeah.
If you have your config manager console on your client and you open it, your config manager console is actually not connecting to the site server. You know what it's connecting to? It's connecting directly to this database.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not connecting to this site server, it's connecting directly straight into this database, accessing the information. But you cannot take this config manager console and connect to a database on the secondary site. Why? There's no client information. The only information you find there is little bit of configuration information, which is why you don't worry too much about secondary site. Because actually, if a secondary site fails, you can put another site to replace it. You can put another server to replace it, and all the information just get back. Because it's only configuration information. There's no client data there.
Right.
So this one is actually it's connecting using something called SMS provider directly straight into a database. And this one, there's no client information. There's no way you can connect to this guy here, this database here. So that's one thing to notice. So site assignment, different. Management point location, different. So after installing the client, it's assigned itself to a site. It says, this is where I get my policies from this primary site. After I've been assigned to a site, so where do I communicate with to get those policies? Because this management point is kind of like the interface between the primary site server and the client. So this management point is talking, of course, with this one. But again, we talk about it because it's talking with this site server, which is talking with this one. But it's like, so I'm now going to start talking to the management point to say, hey, what's the policy? And I'm going to start reporting to the management point. I've done an hardware inventory, here's the report. I've done a software inventory, here's the report. So it's doing all that communication to the management point, but that's step two. That's not site assignment. Site assignment is different. It's I get my policy from you. Any questions for today? Abdul, any questions? Yep. Anyone? Chris, any questions?
I I think I fully understand the primary site contains the database.
Yeah. Nice. That's a
Yep.
really nice one. That's a really nice one. Yeah. And yeah, so it's the database that contains client data. So this one, no, it doesn't contain any client data at all.
It never will, right?
Yeah,
It won't migrate or copy over. It's always the primary site that contains the database, correct?
absolutely not. So the only thing that this guy contains, only thing that database contains is some configuration data.
Okay.
So in other words, how this secondary site server is configured. So which is why, hey, this guy can, fry the next day, just put another server in its place. This guy will just put the whole configuration back because there's no client data here. But if this one goes away, all your inventory data, all your status data, all your task sequence data, they're all gone. Because that database right there is really important. And the whole key point. So there are some really key points in config manager that will help you to understand it. One of those small key points is understanding like this one that we mentioned, that hey, you cannot assign clients to a central admin site or to a secondary site. When you understand that, then you start tracing it. Why can't I assign it to a secondary site? Why can't I assign it? Then you start seeing the reason for the difference between database. So I understand why it can get confusing because they are all called sites. And in my mind before, I used to think secondary site is kind of like a mini primary site. It's like the primary site for the small guys, you know, for the small guys in small locations. But no, it's completely different from the primary site. It cannot do what the primary site does. It does something completely different. Yeah. Okay. So if there are
Okay.
no questions then, so we'll continue again next week. And maybe next week we'll be able to talk about what we wanted to actually talk about, which is which is about doing the client managing the client configuration and then how to monitor the client health, which is what we started with if a client is busted, you've lost configuration manager, but how do you manage it and troubleshoot what's going on with the client health? Okay,
Okay.
thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, David.
No
All right.
problems. Yeah, have a wonderful evening. Speak
You
to you
too.
later.
We'll see you.
Yeah. Cheers.
All right. Bye.
Yeah, bye. Cheers, guy. Bye, Abdul. Make sure you rest well, man. Make sure you don't stress yourself too much. Talk to you later. Bye bye.